talk about how to create purpose-driven organizations. But I have to start by saying we live in the opposite of a purpose-driven world. Look around you. People are starved for meaning. Most people know that their work really doesn't have much meaning. It's unlikely their work is going to change the world. It's pretty unlikely that they're going to create a new company or a new product. And worst of all, people don't feel driven to personally do the work that they are doing. They know that just about anybody could probably do their job. Heck, maybe even a robot could do their job. And so this is really not a great place to be because we are desperate. All of us want to uniquely contribute our skill set. We want to make a difference and create something that really is of value, something that is sustainable. Maybe it's a new product, maybe it's a new company, but that's what we want to do. And we often don't get that chance. And the lack of having that chance, the lack of having a sense of purpose at work, it's devastating. It's devastating to organizations, and it is devastating to people. Gallup recently did a study in 142 countries, and they said, let's talk about engagement. How engaged are people? And what they found was that only 13% of people are engaged at work. That means that only 1 in 8 people are psychologically committed to their job and may actually contribute positively to their work. 1 in 8? Well, where the heck is everybody else? And what are we going to be doing about it? Because this is not a good situation. It's not good for the people, it's not good for their families, it's not good for the environment, and it's not good for the employers. And so what we need to start looking at is, what are we going to do? Because it's just no longer sustainable. People say to me all the time, they say, Anne, why is everything unraveling? Why are organizations unraveling? Well, what I do is I look at the future. I look and see what's going on in terms of global trends and how do we bring it back to organizations. And from my lens, it's actually pretty easy to understand why things are unraveling. And I'm going to talk about, before we move too much into actual purpose, I'm going to talk about 4 global trends that are happening that are either somehow reinforced by the need for purpose or are caused by a lack of purpose that will help us to understand and set the framework for what is purpose. So the first trend we're going to talk about is that people are getting older and they're retiring. Now, this fact that 43% of Americans are going to be leaving the workforce in the next 7 to 8 years, that has nothing to do with actual purpose. However, what it does do is it shows us that, yes, people are getting older, they're going to retire no matter where they are. But the fact that that is happening, the fact that they are retiring, that is going to cause a purpose-driven revolution. Because what's going to happen is as the next group of people come in, otherwise known as Gen Y, as they replace a group of people who are leaving, otherwise known as baby boomers, born between 1946 and 1964, it's going to shift how we think about work. Because the group of people who are coming in, who are replacing the baby boomers, they have a completely different way of working. They have a completely different way of what they expect from work. This group of people born between 1981 and 2001, otherwise known as Gen Y or millennials, they expect 3 things from work. They expect 1, a work-life balance. 2, they expect to have some type of professional development. And 3, they expect purpose. So, because baby boomers are leaving, it's not about purpose for them, but it is all about purpose for the group of people who are coming in behind them. And that's the first trend. The second trend is very similar. And what that trend is that right now we are moving to unbelievably unprecedented amounts of ethnic, racial, and religious diversity all over the world. In the US, only 8% of our population growth is due to white people of European descent. this same group of people who used to be a majority in the US is going to be a minority by 2050. That's going to cause huge, huge ripples as we look at the future of work and we figure out what's going on. Because what we need to think about is, what does that mean in terms of where we are going? What I irreverently say is that our current culture, our current workforce was built for and built by what I irreverently call people who are pale, male, and stale. And that might have worked in the past, but it is no longer going to work, because our future leaders are demanding and expecting diversity. They are diversity. Because this culture that was created, it wasn't ever built for people like Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, or Ursula Burns, who is the CEO of Xerox, or even a grassroots leader like Malala. What we have now wasn't built for these types of leaders. And these leaders are turning our workplace upside down. And they are going to make purpose at the center of it. So we've talked about two trends, the fact that people are getting older and the lack of diversity in our current situation. The next two trends I'm going to talk about are actually about what is caused when there is no purpose at work. And the next trend is that right now, women, senior women, who are talented, who are successful, have said, we are out. We are leaving. Right now, we are having an exodus of talented senior women. And the question is, why? Why are they leaving? And the answer is because they can find it somewhere else. If organizations do not value respect, if organizations do not value equality, it's pretty hard for senior women to get to the top. And it's actually what we're seeing. Right now, we're seeing 5% of US CEOs of Fortune 500s are women. And women only hold 16.5% of the next more senior positions. So you can understand why they said, we're done. We're out of here. We are voting with our feet, and we are leaving. All types of women from all industries. In the EU, we're only seeing 14% of executives are women. But here's an interesting twist to this. While, yes, women started this and they are voting with their feet, men aren't that far behind. Men are also saying, we want something different. We want a place where we also feel like there is respect. And they are starting to vote with their feet as well. Which brings us to the last trend of the four trends that I look at all the time. And this trend is what I call the gig economy, as in G-I-G. I don't mean gigabytes. What I'm talking about an economy where people work for themselves, where they have short-term, non-contractual basis, selling their goods and services, and they work for themselves instead of being on someone else's payroll. And this trend alone is going to really rock the world in terms of purpose-driven organizations. Because as we start to look at this, 40% of our workforce in the US is going to be freelancers by 2020. In just 5 years, 40% of our workforce is saying, this is where we're going. And that number is growing in Europe as well. So this is a huge trend, not just because of the numbers, but because it's becoming the norm. Elance.com, about a year ago, did a survey of UK-based millennial university graduates, and they said, talk to us about the freelance economy. Tell us what's going on. And here's what they found. They found three interesting things. First of all, they found that 29% of UK university graduates said, we think freelancing is part of our career strategy. 38% of those same people said, you know what? We can earn as much money freelancing as we can in the conventional workplace. And 69% of them said, we think that the gig economy, freelancing, is actually going to give us a better work-life balance. That whole term, work-life balance, it was a corporate goal for so long. Lots of people were talking about it. HR was running around trying to figure it out. And it never really got figured out. And yet this group of people, this young group of millennials, they figured out how to get the work-life balance that they want. And it is going to shift and drive our purpose-driven world. So what does all this add up to right now? What it adds up to is that organizations are losing people. They're losing them literally, and they're also losing their souls. Right now, through globalization, technology, short-term profits, right now, we have drifted far, far away from who we are as human beings. We are so connected to our phones, to technology, to the world. And trust me, I am connected to my phone as well. I'm not saying let's not be. But what I am saying is that we've become so connected to that, we've become disconnected to who we are and what our purpose is and our humanity. So as we start to think about where do we go, we need to remember we have gone wide. We've gone very wide, which again is a good thing, and we've tilted too far. It's time to go deep and wide. It's time to find our purpose and then align it with the wide. And that is what we need to do next if we are going to live in a purpose-driven world. Because if people start to understand their own purpose and live that life with their purpose, that's powerful stuff. And if you, as leaders of organizations, help people find their personal purpose and help organize a way that they can align their personal purpose with the organizational purpose, that is magic. So we start to figure this out. We need to figure out, how do we do this? Well, last year, I was honored to be invited among 50 thought leaders in the world to say, well, what is purpose? How do we talk about purpose? What does it all mean? This meeting was held in New York City, and it was organized by a company called Imperative. And what we did is we looked at what purpose is. Now, you might think with 50 different people from all over the world, we probably have 50 different definitions of purpose. But actually, you know what? We agreed pretty quickly. Because it seems that, like with great art, people know purpose when they see and feel it. Have you ever had to drag yourself out of bed going to a job that you hated? It was like pushing a rock up a hill. Yet when purpose is behind people's behavior, there's a different sense. It's almost a lightness. People start to feel differently about their work. And it's not just people. Organizations also feel differently. You can tell when an organization is animated by purpose. There's a different feeling, and people want that feeling. And the good news is that that feeling is not just a great feeling. That feeling also drives performance. Annie McKee, who is the founder of Telios Leadership Institute, she studied dozens of organizations and thousands of people. And what she figured out was pretty amazing when we come to looking at leadership and performance. What she found out, though, is that when we feel negatively about work, when we're just like, about work, we actually don't process information well. We're not as creative, and we don't make sound decisions. Yet when we feel animated by purpose, when we're excited about work, the opposite is true. It's pretty staggering to think that how we feel about work will drive our performance. But also what she found out was that as she studied these thousands of people was that there's actually 3 things that makes people feel good about their work, that makes them want to come back to work. The first thing that makes people feel good about work is they want a meaningful vision about the future. People want to know that they are contributing to a future that matters to them and matters to other people. The second thing that makes people feel really good about work is great relationships. People want constant, trusting, supportive relationships. When they have that, they contribute more positively to work. And what was the third thing that McKee found that made people feel great about their work? No surprise, it was purpose. And when someone's individual purpose is intertwined with an organizational purpose, they felt even more positive about work, and they performed even better. So as we start to look at this, when we start to figure out what does all this mean, it means 3 things. We know purpose when we feel it and see it. We know purpose is an impetus for action, and now we know, thanks to McKee, that purpose is actually one of the drivers of performance. So the million-dollar question is, how do we make it? How do we create purpose? Well, I believe that purpose actually comes from your values. Now, when I talk about values, I am not talking about ethics or morals or right or wrong. When I talk about values, what I mean is, what do you value? What's important to you? We all have certain things. Maybe it's relationships for you. Maybe it's accomplishment. Maybe it's freedom. But there are things that are important to you that you value. And those are known as your values. And when you know your values, it leads you to a better sense of purpose. Most of us have 5 to 7 unique values that define who we are at our core. We call them our core values. I say they're unique because each one of us is unique. So it's very important to understand it's not just the word, but what does it mean to me? Because when I can tap in what it means to me, then I feel a sense of purpose. Now people say, okay, that's kind of interesting, Anne, but how do I do it? It's such a big word, it's so amorphous. How am I supposed to tap into my purpose? It's actually pretty simple. One way to do it is what we call using a peak experience. Now, a peak experience is just a fancy way of saying a moment or a series of moments in time where you felt so aligned, you felt so fulfilled, like everything was going the way it was supposed to go, and you felt powerful like you're on the top of a mountain. That's what we call a peak experience. Let me give you an example of one of mine. About 10 years ago, I co-founded a company called Safaris for the Soul. And during this time was one of my peak experiences. Because what we did during this time is we took leaders from around the world on 2-week trips to Africa for leadership development. Now, for some people, this experience, working with these leaders all over, it might bring up danger. And for others, it might bring up status. For others, it might bring up control. That's not what it meant for me. For me, what I valued about doing these trips that we do once a year is I valued seeing these leaders develop and grow over 2 weeks. I valued being a bit unconventional, being a bit adventurous. I mean, we got to play in the bush. I mean, how exciting was that? And I valued just being outside, not being in a boardroom, not being in an office building. So if you listen to my story, you might say, I bet Anne values nature, being outdoors. I bet Anne values adventure. And I bet Anne values developing people and developing their potential. And you'd be right. Those are 3 of my values. But again, we need to go beyond the words. It's not just the word of adventure or nature. What does it mean to me? Because when we tap into that individually, that gives me my sense of purpose. Because many people might value adventure. I'm sure many of you out there say, yeah, that's pretty important to me too. But I guarantee that if there were 20 of us who were talking about it, we would have 20 different definitions. For some people, adventure might be base jumping and going out and doing all kinds of stuff. It's not me. For some people, adventure might be emotional risk-taking in these really deep conversations. I value relationships, but I'm not doing the emotional risk-taking thing. What it was for me, the adventure that I get to do with these leaders once a year, is I value the freedom it gives me. I value the creativity to develop and work with these leaders. That is what gives me a sense of purpose. Now, the word adventure doesn't really do it for me. It doesn't really mean much to me. So I had to come up with a name that actually meant something to me. And I call that name Wind in Your Face. Doesn't mean anything to any of you, and that's okay. Because it means something to me. It resonates with me. It reminds me when I used to live in Africa, and I have the wind blowing in my face, and I'm standing on the top of a safari vehicle, and anything is possible. And it reminds me, that's what I want to do every day. I want that feeling every single day. So how do I do that? How do I get wind in my face every day? How do I live my values? Because I'm not doing any base jumping. I'm not going to be doing anything crazy. But what I am going to be doing is I am going to figure out ways to bring it into my life, both personally and professionally, because that's what gives me purpose. So professionally, we have a 10-year-old daughter. I travel all the time. My husband travels all the time. We often take her with us. We want her to see the world. That's honoring wind in your face. When it comes to what do I do at work, I am constantly thinking of new ways to do things, new books, new ideas, new products. And that is how I live, wind in your face. Because here's the exciting thing. When I do it personally and when I do it professionally, that is where the energy is. That is where creativity lives. That is where I increase my resilience. So who wouldn't want to live by your values every single day? It's such an important thing. So the question is, people say to me, okay, I kind of heard your story, but how did you do that? Can you explain it to me again? So I'm going to go through it very quickly because this is going to be your homework at the end of today. For you to understand your values, first make sure you understand some kind of peak moment. It doesn't have to be one, it could be 5 years old, it could have been yesterday, but a time where you felt aligned. You're going to either write it down, share it with a friend. Then what you're going to do is you're going to look at that story and you're going to say to yourself, what do I value? What's important in here for me? You're going to give it a name, you're going to give it a meaning to you, and then you're going to figure out, how do I live this every day? What you're going to be doing when you do that is you're going to find ways to bring that into your life, and then you're going to get that creativity and that energy that you're looking for. We don't have time to do a demo right now, but I encourage you to make sure you do it at least by the end of today. And once you do that, once you've identified your values, understood what they mean, find a name that resonates with you, then it's time to put it into practice. And there's many ways you can use to put it into practice. The first is make sure that your values align with your decisions. It sounds pretty simple, but it's not always that simple. Because if our values don't align with our decisions and our behavior, that's where we get the apathy. That's where we start to feel lethargic. So one way to do that is go through your list of values. Ask yourself for each decision you have to make under each value on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 means no alignment, where 10 means total alignment. How does this decision align with what I have as a value? Jot it down. Do that for each value, total it up, and find your average score. You're looking for a 7 or higher, because the research shows that if your number is below a 7, you really aren't going to have the energy and the creativity to do it well. So that's one way you can use your values every day. You can also use your values every day when it comes to doing difficult things. I bet sometime in your career you've had to disappoint a client. Maybe you've had to fire someone. Maybe you've had to lay off a whole team or shut down part of the company. No one wants to do that. Yet when you do it, and these difficult things in alignment with your values, they actually give you more energy. For example, let's say you do this example and you realize that respect is one of your values. So what you want to do then is you want to figure out, how can I respectfully lay someone off? How can I do it in a way that shows respect to both that person and to myself with dignity? When you do that, it'll be a much more authentic and powerful conversation for both of you. I'll give you an example. So when we moved from Kenya, East Africa, to Washington, D.C., let me tell you, it was not an easy decision. None of us really wanted to go. We loved living in Africa, and Washington, D.C. can be a little bit conservative at times. And yet, when we looked at it and we said, what are our values as a family? Growth and development, in terms of our personal growth, were at the top of the list. And we weren't getting it anymore in Kenya, so we had to make the move. Was it easy? No. Was there a lot of adjustment? Yes. And yet we knew it was the right decision because it was in alignment with our top values. Excuse me. Now, some people say, okay, that's interesting, but how do I do this all the time? How do I keep them front and center? A couple tips for you. What you want to do is you can use Post-it notes, you can use a screensaver. Think of a song. If you're a musical learner, find a song that reminds you of your values. You also could just have an image up that reminds you of your values, but keep them front and center. The thing that I always say to people to do as well is use them at the end of the day. It's really easy, go to work, go home, and kind of forget about everything. I tend to do this at the end of the day. What I do is, at the end of the day, I say to myself, how did I do? Did my behaviors, my words, my actions, were they in alignment with my values? It takes maybe 2 minutes. And what it does is it puts those values front and center in my day. It helps me remember what is most important, and then it keeps me focused on what I want to improve for the next day. And I encourage you to do the same as well, because it's like a metric. It's a way to measure how well did I do in terms of living my life aligned with my values. We all measure stuff all the time, right? You probably measure your bank balance every day. You probably measure your weight once a week or so. You probably measure your exercise fitness tracker. We tend to measure what we treasure. So why not add values to your dashboard as well? So we've talked about how to identify, implement, and stay focused on your personal goals. We've understood now how important it is to live a life aligned with those values so that you can really get the energy and the creativity that you're looking for. But what about organizations? How does values and purpose fit into organizations? Well, actually, it's not that different. Just like individuals, organizations have a set of 5 to 7 core values that they also need to implement and live. And what I'm not talking about, I don't want these just to be words on a wall. I want organizations to live them and be proud to proclaim them to their employees and to the world. That's what we're looking for. Let me give you an example of a company that does this very well. And there are many companies that do this, but let me give you a personal example of a company that does this well, which is Facebook. If you work for Facebook, everywhere you go, there are reminders to move fast and break things. First time I saw that, I'm like, what the heck does that mean? They said, oh, these are one of our values. I'm like, those are one of your values? How can break things be an organizational value? Does that mean that if I work there, I get to break the furniture? Does that mean if I work there, I get to break social norms and be rude to you? Does that mean you can break my code? Like, what do you mean by this? And what they said was, no. What it means is that we want you to move fast and break any rules or barriers that can limit success, that can limit possibility. Facebook didn't get to 1.5 billion monthly active users by sticking to the traditional rules. And so they expect, if you work for them by honoring this value, that you are going to move fast and break things. Now, I am not saying that everybody out there, go run out, go make that a new value for you. That value works for Facebook. It probably won't work for your organization. What I am saying, though, is find the values that do work for your organization. Find them and start to live by them. But how do you do that? Well, if you're a startup, pretty easy. Generally, not always, a startup's values tend to reflect their founders' values. But what if you're not a startup? What if you're an organization that already has company history? How are you supposed to go back and reinvent the wheel? Well, step one is, first of all, start with your senior leadership team. And I encourage that you have them do their personal values first. Use that peak experience moment or another exercise and have them do their personal core values first. Think of it like a warm-up exercise. You want to make sure that they understand the language and how to do values before they move on to your organizational values. You also want to make sure they're used to speaking like this with themselves and with others, because some executives and some organizations are pretty comfortable saying things like, at the end of the day, or bottom line, or operationalize. So values language feels a little squishy for them. It feels a little touchy-feely for them. So what I jokingly say to people is, look, when you're trying to start to reinvent and bring in values into an organization that never had it before, or that wasn't living with it before, all you need to say to them is, look, at the end of the day, you're going to operationalize your bottom line thinking. in service of everything you're doing if you get on the same page about values. It feels a little awkward, but it often works. So I encourage you to try that. Now, one thing I also want to say is make sure you do this now. Far too often, people do this too late, after they've hired the employees who have different values, or after they've hired the employees who interpret their values differently. The other thing I want to say at this point is that people often say to me, are values good? Are values bad? There is no such thing as a good value or a bad value. The bad that we often feel when we talk about organizational values is the misalignment or the incongruency between the word and how we implement it and execute it. It's, are we actually honoring our values and using them every day? So as you think about your organizational values, don't get hung up on, is it good, is it bad? Get hung up on, is this going to help us scale? Is this going to help us grow? Once you do that and people start to understand their personal values, get everybody together, have a meeting. It's probably going to be a series of meetings, actually. And make sure that they understand that this is about scaling the organization toward more growth. This is about strategic alignment. It's not about the values that we want, because they're really cool and they're really hip. It's about values that are going to help your organization grow. One tool you can use is called a values pack. It's what you see right here on the screen. You can buy these in many different places. You can make your own. And what it is, it's one word, one value per card. And what I encourage you to do is to get something, make something, do like this to start the conversation. So get everybody together and think of a process that will help them have a conversation on this. You could throw them all on the table, let them sort through until they pick a card that they want to talk about. You could have them all pick a bunch of them, maybe 5 or 6, and then they talk about that. It really doesn't matter how you do it. What matters is that you start the conversation and you keep the conversation going. Once you've identified your values, then you understand what they mean. Now it's time to claim them. And again, just like with personal values, to use them to guide your decisions. We don't want them just hanging out here. We want you to use them every day to create the purpose-driven organization. So let's say, for example, your organization has been offered the opportunity to merge with a larger organization. Here's how you would use your values as a way to start looking at that decision. If your organization realized, after doing this work, that you value risk, that risk is really an important value for your organization, you might look at this merger and you might say, yeah, let's go for it, let's do it, this is going to get us what we want, and you would move forward quickly. If your organization, however, decided that responsibility and duty is your organizational value, you would move very differently. You'd look at the pros and cons, you'd move more slowly, you'd have more meetings. Neither risk nor responsibility as values, neither one of them are good or bad. Neither one of them are right or wrong. What it is how are you using it to move your company forward? Once you've done all that and people understand all that, now you can start sharing it with your employees. Have a party, make a video, do a town hall, whatever it is, but start to share this with your employees, that they understand that there are values. And as you talk about the values, make sure they understand it's not just a word, it's what they need to do every day. For example, let's say that you chose as an organizational value loyalty. And you said, okay, everybody, here we have loyalty is our value. What the heck is someone who worked there supposed to do to honor that value? Are they loyal to the client first? Are they loyal to the team first? Are they loyal to the boss first? What does it actually mean in daily behavior? Help them understand that so that they can be more successful and the organization can be more successful. Once you've done that, and everybody on the team, from the COO to the person who delivers the mail, understands the organizational values and understands what it means on a daily basis for them, Then you can start telling the world. People often do this far too quickly. But when you're ready, share it with the world. Help them understand, what does this mean and who are you as an organization? Share it on social media. Maybe send out a press release if you're that type of organization. Make sure that you're talking about it constantly. Make sure that people understand what it is. And finally, you want to make sure that you infuse purpose into every single process of every single department. Let me give you an example of that. You may have heard of the term called talent life cycle. It's an HR term, an organizational term, and it talks about basically when someone is with your organization from the beginning to the end. So what it's looking at is it's looking at the entire period of your employee involvement from the first interview to hiring to onboarding to development and all the way to the exit interview. And I use this example because it's a fairly easy one for people to understand. So let's just look at it very quickly and how we can infuse values into this. So for example, when you post a job opening, you right now as leaders, and you post that job opening, do you mention your values? Do you share them in the job description? What about the interview process? When you are interviewing someone, however you're doing it, do you ask them about their values? And do you share yours to see if there's a match? What about when you're actually negotiating? Do you use your values to negotiate? Are the values actually in the employee contract? What about onboarding? When you do the onboarding, whether it's 90 days, 100 days, whatever it is, do you talk about the values not so much as here's the word, but more about here's what you do every day? And finally, let's talk about performance and reward. Because let me tell you, every employee knows what an organization truly rewards. And if you are rewarding behavior that is not in alignment with your values, no one's going to pay attention to your values. So make sure that you are rewarding what it is that you want them to honor. Now, this is just one example, the talent life cycle, but you can ask the same questions and do the same thing for every department. Marketing, IT, legal, finance, you can do it all. The thing you want to make sure is that, does this department, whatever department it is, do their behaviors and actions and words reflect our values? Remember, values lead us to purpose. It's like the roots of a tree. Strong values, strong roots, provide the tree with nourishment, good health, and sustainability. If your roots go deep, your tree and the entire corner of your forest will prosper. But if your roots are shallow and starved, because you didn't feed them with any meaning, your tree will eventually fall down. And it won't fall down by itself. It will bring other trees down with it. So I encourage you, I implore you, when you leave here today, please go out and live your life and work the work you want to do by the values. First, go out and find your personal values to give you a personal sense of purpose. Then create organizational values. And if they already exist, intertwine the two together so that we have more positivity at work. And please, don't let these just be words on a wall and in your annual report. Please make them vivid, make them real, and measure them on your dashboard every day. Do this, and you will have more creativity, more energy. You will make better decisions, both as an organization and as a person. You will feel the thrill of wind in your face, and you will live a life defined by purpose. Thank you. So I'm looking at the top question right here. I'm just going to read it out loud for those of you who can't see it. It says, we are talking about the problem of the luckier 10 to 20%. What can we do for the others who have much more serious problems? So yes, we are talking about in terms of Western Europe, US, that type of thing. We're not talking about those who are struggling just to get water and food on the table and are living on $1 a day. I will say, though, however, that if you have a home and you're working 3 jobs, you're still looking for purpose. You're still trying to figure out what it means. And the more that you bring your personal purpose to whatever you are doing, whether it's flipping hamburgers, answering phone calls, whatever, that will give that person more positivity, and that will then help them perform better. Next question is, how do you see the impact of increasing number of freelancers on teamwork? It's a very interesting question. So freelancers are definitely going to impact teamwork. But it doesn't mean that teamwork can't happen just because we're working remotely. What I encourage people to do, though, is make sure that those freelancers are onboarded as much, if not more, than your full-time employees. They need to know the values as well. They need to know what they mean. So don't just bring them on and give them a task and, okay, here it is, I did the graphic design. Make sure that they understand all that about you. A, it will help them do their job better, but it will also help them integrate with the team as we become more of a disparate group. Next question is, what if I cannot identify with my values of the organization, but I still enjoy working there? It's a great, great question, and that happens. Now, hopefully there's not a huge misalignment, right? Hopefully there's not this complete chasm of differences. But hopefully you respect their values, but you have different values. What I say to people is bring more of your values to the organization. State them. Let people know. I use the language all the time when I work with people. Say, you know what? I value creativity. I value freedom. So when we're working together, I want to be a little creative about this. You can still bring yourself to the organization, even if it doesn't align with the exact organization value. We'll do a few more. Is your own value assessment iterative? Do personal values shift over time so that we need to redirect ourselves? So the answer is no. Our values should not shift over time. How we live them will shift. It will go with our stage. I often say it's stage versus age. What I mean by that is that, for example, when you're in your 20s, you're at a different age. When you're in your 30s, a different age, a different stage. So my value right now of wind in the face, it meant something very different when I had my first safari company, when I had my hotel company. It was very different. Now I'm raising a 10-year-old. So it's still there. How I show up with my daughter is different. How I show up with my family is different. It just goes along with the stages. I'm appalled by this artificial differentiation. At 50, I want work-life balance, purpose, and all that. Absolutely. We all do. We all want work-life balance. And the point I was trying to make, maybe I wasn't articulate, is that thankfully Gen Y, otherwise known as millennials, are making us really look at it. We all wanted it. As boomers, as Gen X, was harder to get. Gen Y, the second biggest generation, is saying we are there and they're helping us get over the top. So we all want it. Thank you very much. What if value alignment leads to starving? So I'm assuming, and I could be wrong, this is about like the starving artist type of thing. So what this is how do we make sure that we are in alignment with our values, and how do we find the work to make sure that we can be more of who we are while we are getting that work. All right, we've got 1 minute left. I'm just going to do 2 more. Just saying, I'm using my values as passwords. I like that. I've never heard of that one before. Actually, it does make a difference. Well, I'm glad to hear that. That's another way with Post-it notes, screensaver, to remind yourself of your values. All right, we're going to do one last one, and then we're going to wrap up. In an existing organization, how can the values of people and the company get closer? Not only speaking about diversity, but living it. Great, great question. So this is where organizational truth has to come out. This is where organizational respect has to come out, where we are having conversations together. So again, when you're interviewing people, when you're doing all the talent life cycle, when you're creating groups and committees in a matrix organization, make sure that people are sharing their values, make sure the organization is sharing values, and find a way to align the two. Just give you one quick example. So for example, I value adventure, right? And say I was working for an organization like the IRS, which is a very slow, bureaucratic organization, handles all the US taxes. not really alignment for what I want to do. However, if I was working with that person, I was their direct report, or if I was supervising them, I might say, so how can we bring a little bit more adventure into work? How can we make your day a little bit more adventurous? That will help to start create the two. So again, remember that the future leaders create purpose-driven organizations, and I hope you all do that. Thank you.